Hello, I'm Robert Royal. I'm the editor in chief of The Catholic Thing, which is a daily column series that's published online. And these are the Catholic Thing podcasts, which we're also calling the Vatican Thing because we're all here in Rome covering the synod on synodality that's going on in this month of October. We're fortunate today to have again with us Father Robert Sirico, who's the emeritus president of the Acton Institute, which has done enormously important work around the world in promoting freedom, political freedom, economic freedom, and a virtuous society. And we've got a day that's being called a vacation this Tuesday here in Rome for the Synod. So we thought that we would bring him back and talk about something other than the Synod for at least one day. So, Father, welcome. It's good to have you back. What I wanted to talk with Father Sirico about is a film that he produced under the auspices of the Acton Institute about the Chinese Catholic layman and activist. I guess we should call him the Hong Konger because he's from Hong Kong. And his name is Jimmy Lai. Um, Father, I was with a Catholic couple, a very well informed, intelligent Catholic couple who have advanced degrees this weekend. And I was shocked that they had never heard of Jimmy Lai, even though they try to follow Catholic things. And I thought it would be good if we started out. I'm sure some of our viewers and listeners know a bit about Jimmy Lai, but for the others, could you just give us a kind of a general summary of who Jimmy is, why he's important, and why we should be paying attention to him?
Sure. Well, first of all, they may not have known the name Jimmy Lai, but they know the impact that he's had because everyone who saw the demonstrations going on prior to COVID in Hong Kong, the umbrella uprising, and all of those great protests, which brought out I think fully a third of Hong Kong out onto the streets know Jimmy Lai because he's very much a part of all of that, which brings us to why he's in prison at this point. Jimmy's life starts in Shanghai during the Cultural Revolution. He's 3 years old now. He escaped to Hong Kong at a time where once you landed, you were a Hong Konger, and then began to work odd jobs, just very simple jobs in textiles, and built a business to the point that Giordano, which is a well-known clothing chain, kind of like Benetton, but throughout China, mainland China, including Hong Kong, uh, built his empire. And then the Chinese government, because of Tiananmen Square, he was distributing free T-shirts calling for freedom for China. They basically warned him and forced him to sell his interests in that company. He turned around and invested that money into a media empire, including the most widely read newspaper in Hong Kong, Apple Daily, and then a larger media complex called Apple Daily. I'm sorry, the name just slips me for a second here. But the result of all of that is that he was involved in the protests, spoke out against the security law and the basically changing the law in Hong Kong to provide for two. You remember the phrase that Margaret Thatcher used: two nations, two systems, one country, and was put in jail, and then. Basically, now he is being held on the worst of the charges, which is treason that could result in life imprisonment.
He's a Catholic convert, isn't he? And he's shown
Yes.
enormous courage and ability to tell the truth in some very difficult circumstances. He and Cardinal Zen, who have both been arrested at different times for
Cardinal
speaking the
Zen
truth.
baptized him.
Right. Um, The Vatican has signed what's still called a secret agreement with
Yeah.
China. Secret in the sense that we know it exists, but we don't know what is actually in it. Has the church said anything? I mean, other than Cardinal Zen himself, is the church or the church hierarchy said anything about Jimmy Lai being detained in prison on what are obviously trumped up charges to keep him from speaking out against a very repressive communist regime?
Right. No, not that I'm aware of. No official statements on the part of the Vatican. They're, basically engaged in this osteopolitique, kind of a throwback to the communist, the pre-Cold War era, where they are trying to make nice as long as there's no open conflict. They think there's peace, and it's evident that the Vatican has agreed to allow the communist government of China to have veto power over appointments of bishops. So that's kind of the way it seems to be working now. But I'm aware of no statement, no official statement on the part of the Pope or the Secretary of State or any of the Vatican organs of describing Jimmy Lai's situation. I am aware of many bishops and cardinals who are concerned about this.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear from people, they complain that they feel that the synod, right, whether they're right or wrong about this, they feel that the synod is a very inward looking, almost kind of abstract exercise, when in fact there are things like this going on in the world where, uh, a very courageous, I mean, the term white martyr has been used about him. You might think about him in terms of being a kind of a confessor.
Yeah.
Well, people like this are being persecuted, and actually the church in general in China is under a lot of pressure. At least the faithful who are loyal to Rome are under a lot of pressure. Almost nothing is being said about that aspect of what the church's life is like at this moment in the modern world.
Yeah. And can you imagine that people have to register to go to Mass on an app in China? Children are not allowed to go to Mass or be catechized. Even the two Chinese bishops who came to the synod could only stay for 2 weeks and they were pulled back, and that had happened at a previous synod. Um, these kinds of things are unacceptable, and the quiescence of the official Vatican apparatus uh, is quite surprising. It's very different from the way John Paul II confronted communism in Europe, which resulted in the destabilization of the communist regimes throughout Europe.
Right. Yeah. As you know, I've written a book about the 20th
Yeah.
century martyrs, a big comprehensive book, kind of a global survey. And people still don't realize this, but most of the martyrs in the 20th century were produced by communism. There were other totalitarianisms like Nazism, but it's basically communism in Russia, former Soviet Union, China, in Latin America that produced these modern martyrs who we don't really believe exist. A lot of Catholics don't know that they exist, but they do exist. And they continue to be made in places like China. You have known Jimmy for decades. You're a
Yes.
personal friend of his. Could you give us a sense? Because when I wrote my book on the 20th century martyrs, a woman asked me once, "Weren't you depressed reading about what happened to all these people?" And it brought me up short because I said to her just spontaneously, "I never spent so much time with such wonderful, heroic people."
Yeah.
Can you give us a sense, since you know him? I think maybe you told me that you had some contact with him early in the year. How is he bearing up? He's been over 1,000 days in prison at this point.
Yes. Remarkably well. I have contacts, not direct contacts with him. Obviously, he doesn't make phone calls from prison, but I have spoken to people who have seen him. Um, and you know that we produced an entire film on this whole thing called The Hong Konger, which is available to anyone on YouTube. And I think by watching that, you get a sense of this man. He's serious, he's committed, he's principled, he's unafraid. The one thing I should note about him is that it wasn't like he was arrested because he was trying to smuggle himself out of the country. He stayed. He could have left at any time. He has a Hong Kong, I'm sorry, a UK passport. He could have left at any time. He has homes around the world, but he elected to stay because he said he's leading this movement, or one of the leaders of this movement, and he couldn't just stir up the trouble and then let other people suffer. So this gives you a sense of the man. I may have shown you the crucifix, the artist rendering of a crucifix he did with
I have that
Chloe.
myself. I have that myself on my desk at home. Yeah.
Yeah, he made a number of those, and then the Christmas card of the Blessed Virgin Mary that he sent out. Uh, Somebody told me when I asked after him, I had sent a copy of my book on the economics of the parables to him, and I said, "What is he reading?" And he said, "Actually, he's reading the Summa Theologica right now." So he's deepening. I mean, this is a man. If you meet him, you wouldn't know he was a billionaire. You wouldn't know that he's just a very common man who has a deep intellectual curiosity, which is what led him to business and understanding free markets, and was a friend of Milton Friedman, but also then eventually to his Catholic faith.
Yeah, as we know, I mean, most billionaires are able to move very quickly over international borders,
Oh
and for a
yeah.
man to stay when he must have known he almost certainly was facing prison and maybe
No, we
worse.
know that he knew because we had interviewed him before it, 10, 15 years before it. He's on tape. In fact, some of the clips that are in our film were filmed 15 years ago where he said, I think they're going to arrest me. And then leading up to it, he said, it's sure that I'm going to be arrested. He knew.
You've mentioned in other venues that he's still in Hong Kong. So
Yes.
even though Hong Kong is not as separate a system as it was when the British first left, he's in a relatively better situation in Hong Kong than if he gets moved to the Chinese mainland.
Yeah.
Could you
And
explain a little bit about that for
so
our listeners?
part of the whole change that's been going on and that resulted in all these protests in Hong Kong just prior to COVID being the excuse that the Chinese government took to put a clamp down on all demonstrations and everything, or those would have still been going on. One of the things that they were protesting was the change in the basic law that governed Hong Kong, and then the extradition treaty, which is quite extensive, that could allow people even to be e- extracted from countries outside of China. Who are you may have read that the Chinese government basically put a bounty on the heads of about 6 or 7 dissidents from around the world, and one of them was flying through, I've forgotten, was it Singapore, and was arrested by the Chinese government and brought back to mainland China. So if they extradite him to mainland China, he'll disappear into that whole morass, and we won't know what we know now because people are visiting him. And the contention right now is that he wants his UK lawyers representing him in the Hong Kong court, which thus far the Chinese government has resisted.
Yeah. I mean, we can't emphasize enough. I've seen that film, The Hong Konger, and I want to say to everyone, go to YouTube. It's an hour-long film. It's beautifully produced, and kudos to you, Father,
Thank you.
for doing that. It's for free, and it'll enlighten you about something that's going on about a very heroic Catholic in the modern world at a time when lots of us feel that we're confused about our faith, etc. But I'd like to just ask you one more question before we close. Um, everyone should see this film if you don't know anything about Jimmy Lai, and even if you do, it'll inspire you, and it'll probably inform you in ways that you aren't fully informed about already. What else can the rest of us do who are listening and watching right now to help him? Because it's very frustrating. And in a world that is an internet world, a country like China can surveil its people as at no time in the past. I mean, you can track
Right.
everybody down by their cell phones and whatnot. But by the same token, we have some means, at least, to respond to that. So I'm sure you've
Yes.
given this some thought, and can you share those thoughts with us?
We're advised by people pretty savvy in social media that if we can keep building the pressure, especially through social media, by people just going on their Twitter accounts or Facebook or various ways of linking this film, which, by the way, is subtitled in the two main Chinese languages, but also a number of other languages, and let people know about it so that that couple that you talk to would know the name Jimmy Lai and make the connections of what's going on here. The fact that this threatens the Chinese government, this film and the kind of discussion we're having right now, is evident by the fact that when we decided to post the film rather than go through the usual process of putting it in theaters or film festivals and all that, which we did a bit of, was when we posted the film and the links on TikTok that we were taken down that very day. Now, you remember the hearings that took place in the Senate with the head of TikTok, who is swearing that the Chinese government has nothing to do with what they allow to be posted. Meanwhile, they took down the three clips that we had on there. And when the Wall Street Journal and other news sources editorialized against them, they put it back up, but they put only two of them up. They said this was just a mistake in our algorithms because there was violence being shown. Well, the violence were the protests and the beating of the protesters by the Hong Kong police. It's funny, they put those scenes back up, but not the political commentary being offered by Hong Kongers and Jimmy Lai himself. So that tells you how threatening the open discussion is. And if we can get this in any way onto the mainland, this could also foment the subterranean unrest that exists in mainland China right now.
Right. Well, it's always the case in totalitarian regimes that mistakes are made, but it's funny that there are always mistakes that help further repress the people that they're trying to keep down.
Exactly.
Father, thank you very much. We can't emphasize enough. Do go see this film on YouTube, The Hong Konger,
And then
and
tweet
you'll
it.
be and then tweet it out, and you'll be very glad you did, because you know what, holiness and heroism still exist in our world, and one of the examples of those two great virtues is this businessman, entrepreneur, Catholic, Jimmy Lai. So, Father, thank you. We'll have you
Thank
back one
you.
of these days soon.
Likewise.
Those of you listening and watching, thank you for being here, and we'll see you again very soon.